To my fellow Jews, to my friends in the Democratic Party who want to support Israel and think of themselves as progressive, it is important to look at what Israeli law today does, what the lived experiences of Palestinians today means as defined under international law, and what our friends from South Africa have long pointed out. But we should not stop there. South Africans didn't just define apartheid, they dismantled it. Instead of attacking Rashida Tlaib for her candor, her critics should ask themselves how Israeli apartheid could be dismantled. What would a post-apartheid country look like? Lashana Tova.
That was a clip from the Katie Halper show on The Hill, the place most people think is run by the U.S. Congress. But more about that later. And welcome to the Mark Steiner Show here on The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner, and it's great to have you all with us. Now, that clip got Katie Halper fired from the Hill TV show The Rising, where she was a commentator and a guest host. Why? Because Katie Halper had the temerity to address the attacks against Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and called the Israeli state an apartheid state, something that many Israeli leaders also do. Now, rather than address the issues honestly and allow for a serious discussion to take place, they fired Katie Halper. And the group that ultimately fired her, Nexstar Media, bought The Hill for $130 million last August. And its deputy managing editor, Jake Novak, had been the media director for the Israeli Consulate General in New York City. Now, nothing keeps Katie down, apparently. She comes from generations of fighters for justice in America. Her roots go back to the centers of anti-Semitism in Europe. She's a comedian, hosts the Katie Halper Show podcast, and co-hosted with Matt Tabibi the podcast Youthful Idiots, which she still co-hosts. And has written many news articles for many organizations, the New York Times, The Guardian, The Nation, and numerous others. And along the way, she produced many documentary films, including Commie Camp. Now, it's a difficult ground to walk, to stand up as a Jew against the oppression of Palestinians. I know that from personal experience. In 1967, I volunteered to fight in the 67 War, but didn't go, and then met the occupation. And it's difficult to walk that thin line sometimes between anti-Semitism and fighting for the rights of Palestinians. And then again, it's difficult not to. More and more young Jews are coming to this realization. That's why it's a pleasure to say, Katie Halper, welcome to the Mark Steiner Show.
Thanks for having me.
Have any inkling thought at all that this was coming at you when it happened?
No, I didn't, because I had been, as you said, a guest. I was a weekly guest for 3 years. I would appear on the show every week to do a segment on media and politics. And then I had also done some guest co-hosting and was going to be doing more. And I had, as a guest, not as a host, but as a guest, I had spoken about Israel. I said that they lied about murdering Shireen Abu Akleh. And so I didn't think this would happen. I thought that people would complain, maybe write to the Hill to try to get me fired. I mean, that happens all the time. In fact, because of a segment that I'd already done, this organization, this right-wing organization called Honest Reporting, kind of ironically named, I guess. They try to get people fired constantly for criticizing Israel. They had written an article called, like, What the Hill, which is very clever, I guess. But I was critical of Israel. What happened this time, though, was a little different. Hosts get to do these things they're called radars, which are basically straight to camera monologues. So this was the first time I had done a radar, and I was going to do 3 of them, one on Israel, one on Ukraine, and one on immigration. Of course, if I had started out with immigration or Ukraine, I probably would still be at the Hill as we speak. But the Rashida Tlaib thing happened, where she was smeared for just saying that people are realizing more and more that you can't be progressive and support the Israeli apartheid government. She was smeared for saying that. Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL smeared her, also misrepresented what she said that she had imposed a litmus test on American Jews. She didn't say anything about American Jews at all.
Right.
It was totally dishonest misrepresentation on his part. So I responded by writing a monologue, a radar script about both defending Rashida Tlaib and also laying out why Israel, whether or not you like it, is actually an apartheid government. And I laid it out by citing the United Nations, International Criminal Court, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, various Palestinian human rights organizations, B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, Israeli officials and prime ministers, and then Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, and a present-day current South African minister who had just addressed the UN General Assembly, and ironically enough, cited someone named Daniel Levy, who was an Israeli negotiator in the Oslo Peace Accords. All of these people have pointed out that Israel is an apartheid government.
So I'm going to take a step backwards just a minute and come right back into the censor of what happened to you here. But I'm curious about your own sojourn to this place. Before we get into some specifics about the Israeli apartheid state and more, I mean, what was your journey, Katie Halper, because as I said in the introduction, as a Jewish person, sometimes it can be really difficult to kind of leap into these things because there's a lot that flies in your face when you do. So what was your own sojourn to this kind of human and political position?
Well, I wasn't raised, I didn't have any struggle really. Like my family, I come from a very left progressive family. I mean, my views are basically the same as my parents on most issues. I think that it's maybe easier for Jews to talk about this because whereas we'll get labeled self-loathing Jews, others will get labeled anti-Semites. Of course, I'm getting called an anti-Semite also. And I like to point out, I'm like, please address me with the correct slur. Don't erase my Jewishness. Thank you very much. But it wasn't that hard for me, honestly. I mean, it's hard for me to sometimes, as we can see in this example, it's hard to speak out about this. But I didn't have a struggle where I had some kind of crisis because I had been raised on Zionist mythology. I hadn't been.
Got you. Yeah, I think most of us were raised on the Zionist mythology. I mean, I was grew up in a family where there were people with numbers in their arms sitting in my living room.
Sure.
You know, and Dad was kind of a Jewish nationalist, and family in Israel, and
I have cousins in Israel also, but in fact, one of my mom's cousins was dating a Palestinian, and then the wall went up, and that got in the way of that. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And no relation to Jeff Halper.
Not that we know of. No. Probably maybe back in the day, but we're aware of it.
Right. Generation somewhere in there.
Right. Some shtetl.
But right.
Yeah.
So, but I think that what I was getting to with that is that I think that it becomes really hard for some people because if you oppose the oppression of Palestinians, oppose what's become the apartheid state in this occupation and more, and sometimes there's a really thin line between fighting for the rights of Palestinians and also knowing that some of it is fueled with the ancient kind of anti-Semitism that's embedded in humanity. And I'm curious how you politically would think about how you parse that. How do you begin to explain that and get through that?
I mean, I think that honestly, there's such a difference between anti-Semitism and standing up for the rights of Palestinians. And I think that so much of what the Israel lobby does and the ADL and AIPAC does is they try to conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
But ironically, you know, it's an anti-Semitic trope to suggest that all Jews are a monolith with the same view of Israel. And it's an anti-Semitic trope to suggest that being Jewish means you are a supporter of the government of Israel. And that's something related to, you know, the anti-Semitic trope of the dual loyalty myth, you know, that Americans are more loyal to Israel than they are to the United States. And my Jewish identity, to the extent that my Jewish identity shapes my view of politics, I mean, people may know about this or may not, but there's this concept, tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. It's a Hebrew term. I'm not religious. I didn't go to Hebrew school. I wasn't bat mitzvah or anything, but that's certainly something. There's a rich history of lefty Jewish resistance. There are Jews who say never again to anyone, and then there are Jews who say never again just to Jews.
Right.
And I'm in the former group, obviously.
Right.
So, yeah.
And it's a group that it seems to me that is growing. I mean, I was reading the other night the Pew poll that came out, I think in 2020 that was a poll of Jewish attitudes towards Israel and what's happening with the Palestinians. And you can see from the poll that the less religious you are, the more you begin to question it. People in their 20s to the early 40s, a majority of them really question what Israel is doing and don't think they're really trying to create a world for all to live in quote unquote the Holy Land.
Right.
So I mean, and then you have what happened to you now, and how these things fit together for you. What do you think this means in the larger context for that struggle?
Well, Mondo Weiss had a piece saying that the firing of me represents like a kind of how desperate the Israel lobby is and how much more popular the view that Israel is an apartheid government has become. So I think it's a sign that there is a growing. I mean, what's kind of amazing is that this very controversial monologue was based on, again, not just Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch reports, but B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights organization, and also things that actual Israeli politicians have said. I think in Israel, people will be honest about it, even if they defend it, whereas Americans don't want to say it's like, I think some right-wing Israelis will be like, yeah, it's apartheid, but it's better than what they'd have under Hamas, or yeah, it's apartheid, right, but it has to be that way. Whereas here, and I don't endorse those arguments, but they're at least based on facts on the ground. Like the analysis or the moral ethical analysis is wrong, but they at least acknowledge what's happening on the ground. I think for a lot of American Jews, they won't even admit that. Or if you say it's apartheid, they're like, well, what should happen to Israel? Do you want it to exist? And they can't look at the apartheid thing without looking at a larger question about like Israel's existence.
And in that piece that you did, and we heard Rashida Tlaib at the top of the conversation, you also had these series of clips from people who are Israelis about apartheid. And let's just take a quick listen if you're listening, or take a quick watch if you're watching.
Former Attorney General Michael Ben-Yair wrote in 2002, "We established an apartheid regime in the occupied territories immediately following their capture. That oppressive regime exists to this day." Zahava Galon, former chair of Israel's Meretz party, said, in 2006, Israel was relegated to the level of an apartheid state. In 2007, Israel's former education minister, Shulamit Aloni, wrote, "The state of Israel practices its own quite violent form of apartheid with the native Palestinian population." In 2008, former Environment Minister Yossi Sarid said, "What acts like apartheid, is run like apartheid, and harasses like apartheid is not a duck, it is apartheid." In 2015, former Mossad chief Meir Dagan said, "President Benjamin Netanyahu's policies are leading to either a binational state or an apartheid state."
So, I mean, looking at that, I mean, you have Michael Ben-Yair, the former Attorney General, and Zahava Galon from the Meretz party, and Yossi Sarid, and others kind of, and Rabin saying that Israel could become or is an apartheid state.
Right.
So, and of course, when you say that to people, they go, "Oh, what apartheid state? That's insane. That's South Africa." You know, right. I mean, so let's talk a bit about that. I mean, that getting to becoming an apartheid state and how we actually address that. How do you organize and deal with that?
I mean, I don't like that's, I guess, something that will be worked out. And I don't know what's going to happen in terms of one state or two state. But the first thing is you have to just acknowledge it. And it is, you just look at Israel's laws. I mean, what's kind of insane is that Israel, as recently as 2008, passed this nation state law.
Right.
That was just overtly like Jewish chauvinist, and it established like settlements as part of like the nation's goals, which is insane. They're just like wearing it on their sleeves. I mean, it's ethnic cleansing. I mean, that's really what it is. And they're just trying to Judaize the whole region. They also demoted Arabic from an official language to a language with special status. This was scandalous even to people who usually defend Israel.
I'm really kind of been interested for a while now in just how Jews, whether we are secular Jews or Jews on the left or people who are religious, whoever we are, how you begin to come together to really address this from here. I mean, part of the power that allows this to exist is the support it gets from us in a larger
Right.
sense, not you and me, but in a larger sense. And it, and I think that there's something that's bubbling, and it's difficult for some people to cross that line because of the fears people have about anti-Semitism and more. But it's growing, and you can see it growing, right? So I'm curious what, as you think about this and whether it's going to be one of your comedic riffs or a serious piece you write, how we begin to pull that together here, because without the support of us in America, Israel will have a harder time existing as
Sure.
it is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't be able to exist without the military aid that we give them. They certainly wouldn't be able to exist the way they exist. There's also the question of, when people think that you're being an anti-Semite for criticizing Zionism, I mean, it's worth remembering that the majority of Zionists are actually Christian. There are obviously a lot more Christians in the world than Jews, and so they make up the largest block. And so those are the kind of right wing. A lot of them are like born again evangelicals who want Jews to move back to Palestine, to Israel, Palestine. They call it Israel, obviously, right? To be basically, I think 400 of us get spared, and then all the
Right, the
rest
rest
of
of us
us
die.
burn in eternal damnation. Yeah, so they have it on their agenda as well. Look, I think that people have to realize that, I mean, it's disgusting. The settlements are disgusting. And this is, people often say like it's not good for either side. Certainly you can't have this. This is unstable. There's not going, but I also don't want to whitewash it. It's not like Israeli Jews are suffering to the same extent that Palestinians are at all.
Right.
It's totally asymmetrical. But, I think that, I don't know, it's disgusting. It's just chauvinism and ethno-nationalism. And I'd like to think that people would want to live in a different world where that doesn't happen. But I'm not sure, honestly. I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's more sustainable, I think, than we'd like to believe. I mean, it's sustainable at a price. I mean, it's occupation, permanent occupation, and apartheid.
Right, and it is sustainable, and it can last a long time. Look how long apartheid lasted in South Africa. Look how
Right.
long enslavement and segregation lasted in this country. So it doesn't mean it's going to be gone overnight, and nor will it be an easy task to end it.
Right.
And I often have said in some pieces I've done that that the continuing apartheid regime in Israel and what Israel has done is destroying the soul of the Jewish people as well. You
Yeah.
can't Go ahead.
Right. It's kind of like what Martin Luther King said or what Gandhi said
Right.
about how it destroys the oppressor as well.
And I somehow I wish I could figure out a way to shake people up and
Right.
and pay attention to that.
And I think maybe that's true, but there are people who are just, I mean, I honestly think that the people who are like the settlers don't care about that. They see it as a righteous mission that they're on, or they don't even care. They just want a cheap, nice apartment. Which I guess I didn't mean to say that was
No, that's cool.
yeah. But not suggesting Jews are cheap. I just mean that obviously they're below market when you like just steal them from people.
Right.
I was actually just reading, re-listening to on audio tape, and I really recommend this book, The General's Son by Miko Peled, which is fascinating. He's the son of a general who was like a national hero. He fought in the 6 Days War. He very decorated general, and then he became a peace activist and would meet with Palestinians. This is his father. And then Miko, his son, became even more of a peace activist, or more to the left of his father. His father was still a Zionist at the end of his life. Miko is no longer Zionist. But what's interesting is that not only does he come from this family, and on both sides of the family, his grandfather on the mother's side, I think, was like one of the signatories of Israeli independence.
Mm.
And his niece tragically was killed by a suicide bomber. And so a lot of people who experience those things in their life come out quite right wing on this. But he's a major human rights champion. And I was just listening to his book, The General Son, on audio tape on Audible, and he was recounting visiting like a settlement, seeing a guy's apartment that was way below market rate. I think a British guy had moved there.
Mm-hmm.
So that was in my head.
That is reality.
Yeah.
So let me come back to exactly what happened with you and what's happened to the Hill. Because one of the things I said in the opening here, and I think most people who even follow or watch or read the Hill, think it's a organ of the U.S. Congress, and it's not.
Right.
So talk about that. That had a role in all of this. I mean, Nexstar, the company, how that fit into this, and your firing. Talk a bit about that and how you think all that fits together, and that this is really just a gigantic part of a multi-million dollar private corporation that owns vast amounts of media sites.
Right. So the Hill was recently bought in August. It was bought by Nexstar Media Group, and they bought it for $130 million. And you mentioned this in the intro.
Yeah.
But they donate like overwhelmingly to GOP affiliated PACs. I think they gave 80% of its money to GOP affiliated PACs.
Right.
In 2016, and then in 2018 that rose to 100%. Its CEO donated 6 times as much to high-ranking Republican congresspeople as he did to Democrats. This is all, by the way, from Jacobin, a great article by Branko Marcetic that you can find at Jacobin, just for viewers and listeners to know. And Branko writes, if Nexstar is being driven by a pro-Israel slant that it enforces in its programming, it's a serious concern. After buying Tribune Media in 2019, Nexstar became the largest local broadcast TV owner in the country, outstripping the explicitly right-wing Sinclair Broadcast Group. According to an August 2022 filing with the SEC, the company now reaches nearly 40% of all U.S. television households, and it owns, operates, and provides services to 199 television stations and 1 AM radio station across Washington, D.C. and 39 states. In the filing, the company notes the Supreme Court's April 2021 striking down of FCC limits on local media ownership. So, very scary.
When I read that article and then was thinking and contemplating about you being fired and what happened to you, and then looking at the amount of control that they have, that Sinclair has over the media in this country, and could fire you for just instead of doing what media should be doing, which is saying, okay, Katie, you have this idea. Well, other people don't. We're going to have a debate. We're going to look at it. We're going to get into it. Instead of doing that, they said, no, we're going to shut Katie up. We're going to fire her.
Yeah,
which is
they fired me because I pushed back, because after they told me they weren't going to run the monologue, which they shot, they just weren't going to release it. After that, I was trying to, because what they told me, the producers told me that they had this policy that they wouldn't do op-eds, either written or video, on Israel, but that they would do segments. And so segments are, when I appeared every week I would tape it on Thursdays, it would appear on Saturdays. Those are considered segments. They're just a chat, a discussion between me and the host. Mm-hmm. This was different. This was something I was hosting, and I read a monologue straight to the camera. So when I got a call from the editor-in-chief of The Hill telling me they weren't going to run it, I then reached out to the producers, and I was like, okay, so can I do this on my segment tomorrow? And that's when I was told to check my email and saw that I was, no longer needed, basically, my services. So my 3-year-long relationship with them, where I would just appear every week, that was severed. And of course, my hosting was severed too. Cut off. Yeah.
So when you think about this, beyond this absurd moment that you just experienced, and a dangerous moment, I think. And it's the danger that I'm thinking about as well in a larger sense of what this means for the future of media in America. And when you look at this in terms of also the right-wing push in this country and across the globe, but in the United States this moment, and how the media plays a role in that and who actually controls it now and where it's going. I mean, this is when I thought about those things last night, putting all those little pieces together and thinking about our conversation today, I was thinking how dangerous a moment we're in and how your firing is emblematic of the depth of that danger.
Yeah, I think it is scary. And I think that you have to remember that The Hill basically realized that this was profitable to have views that seem outside the mainstream. I mean, that's kind of their shtick, that they let you say things. They have people on from the right who say things that the Republican Party won't say. They have people on from the left who say things that the Democratic Party won't say. And then they have people saying things that just most corporate media won't tolerate. And that was true to a certain extent. And then it's not true at a certain point, which is when you try to do a monologue about Israel.
As I was thinking about this as well, I was thinking about what your thoughts would be, both of us being in the media, and that how you really address this and attack what has happened to you and others like you. I mean, I would say at the beginning, Hassan Salam was also just fired from the New York Times because they didn't like his reporting and what he was shooting in Gaza, Israel, and the West Bank, in Israel-Palestine. So how do we, as media people and as people who are involved in the struggle for human rights, how do you begin to address this? Because it's a dangerous precedent. You know, it's very easy to take an anti-Semitic slant from people and go, yeah, the Jews control the media. They're not letting us talk. So
that's what drives me crazy about this, actually. One of the many things that drives me crazy about this is that it's feeding into this anti-Semitic stereotype. Like, this should not be an issue that you're not allowed to talk about. And I don't get why people. Well, I do get it because they are supportive of the state of Israel. They care more about that than not furthering Jewish stereotypes, anti-Semitic stereotypes. I should say, not Jewish stereotypes, anti-Semitic stereotypes.
Right, and that's this weird kind of, for want of a better term, this kind of weird dialectic dance that's intertwining things that are being harder and harder to pull apart.
Yeah,
because of what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, and again, it is anti-Semitism to suggest that there's one Jewish opinion on Israel.
Yes, witness us.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a long history of anti-Zionist Jews.
Oh yeah,
some for religious reasons, some for political reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be something to really kind of parse out for people to think through on that level, because left Jews on the left, communists, others, all supported the state of Israel in '48, and the world did, not knowing, not paying attention to Palestinians, not thinking about any of that, just because of the Holocaust and more. But somehow, we, people like you and me, but more you because you're younger and will continue doing it for a longer time than I now, are going to have to kind of tear that open to deal with that reality, and in terms of what should be.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because anti-Semites are the ones who conflate Zionism with Jews. I mean, they call Jews Zionists. So it is funny again to see how both anti-Semites and people like the ADL and AIPAC are trafficking the same stereotypes.
I wrote a poem in 1968. I'll have to send to you, and maybe I'll republish it. Called "Growing Up Jewish," and I realized I read it the other night again, knowing I was going to talk with you, and it was saying then in '68 what we're doing there at this moment in the occupation is going to destroy us, and I think that it's coming to fruition. I mean, the Israeli left all live somewhere else. They live in Germany. They live here. They live someplace else.
England, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the oppression of Palestinians is obscene, and what's happening to us, I think, is obscene to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I just. So what do you? I know you have many things going on beyond The Hill. That was just one aspect of your work.
Right.
So how do you follow up with this? What are your plans and thoughts?
Well, we released the video. So the cool thing is that I approached Breakthrough News, and they are based in New York City, which is where I'm based. So what I did was I just went in and shot the video that I had recorded with The Hill, but wasn't released. I recorded it with Breakthrough News. So you can find that video at youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show, and also at youtube.com/Breakthrough News. It's almost gotten 100K views. Hopefully by the time this is released, it'll have gotten 100K views at my site, and it's gotten 80 something views at Breakthrough News. So if you combine those, it's over 150,000 views.
That's great.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep talking about these issues, and I mean talking about other issues that are considered beyond acceptable discourse. I mean, so my shows focus on what's happening in Israel, also Ukraine, and provides a perspective that you rarely see in corporate media. And to be fair, who knows? Because maybe if I'd written a monologue, a radar on Ukraine, that would have also been forbidden. But I was able to talk about those things and Israel on The Hill before. But I'll just keep doing that on my show, on Useful Idiots. I'm having Noura Ericot on my show soon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Miko Peled, who I mentioned. Going to have Roger Waters back on. I have gotten a lot of support, which is great. Rashida Tlaib tweeted something. Roger Waters tweeted something. Roger Waters mentioned my firing on the Joe Rogan show. A lot of people have covered it. You guys are covering it now, obviously. So that's the real silver lining, I guess, is that there are people who are really supportive because they know that this is an important issue and an issue that shouldn't be censored, but does get censored. And people like Mark Lamont Hill, Stephen Salaita, Juan Cole, Norman Finkelstein, all these people have also either been censored or lost their jobs or not gotten tenure or not been offered an academic position for speaking out.
And that's an important place for us to talk about. I mean, it's happened to all of us, I think, who have kind of stood up. And I'm thinking more and more people are standing up, which is really important. And what I'll do, make sure is that all those links are attached to this conversation.
Yeah.
And we're going to...
Yeah, Mondo Weiss, Electronic Intifada, Juan Cole, the Sheer Post, Matt Taibbi, all these places have written about what happened, or posted the video.
And I'm going to do the same. And I'm going to pump it out of here. I'm also going to pump it out of my own places and get it out there. Katie Halper, it's really been a pleasure to meet you. And
yeah, you too.
And I look forward to seeing more of what happens and more conversation for us to have. And waiting for you to come to D.C., Baltimore, maybe and do a stand-up so I can watch.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm getting a reward from the Women's Institute of Freedom of Press.
Yeah.
So I'll be in D.C. then.
Great. Katie, I'm going to thank you so much for your work, and thanks for standing up. It's been a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to have you on the air with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for joining us today. You can find links to Katie Halper's work and the videos we mentioned right here on the Steiner Show site on The Real News. Now, please let me know what you think about what you heard today and what you'd like us to cover. Just write to me at mss@therealnews.com, and I'll get right back to you. And while you're there, go to www.therealnews.com/support and become a monthly donor. Become part of the future with us. So for Dwayne Gladden, Stephen Frank, Killer Rivera, and our hardworking crew here at The Real News that makes everything happen, I'm Mark Steiner. Thanks for joining us. Stay involved, keep listening, and take care.